Our fathers are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What about their circumcision, which assured them of their position in God's holy nation? What about the law that was delivered to them? That's their defense and that's their pride. That's what they stand on, those things. So let's look at those things. Let's go to Matthew chapter 3 first. Verses 9 and 10. And this is John the Baptist talking to the Jewish leaders that have come out to kind of get in on the getting baptized part. And because many of the Jews were going to do it. Chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. And John says, "And think not to say within yourselves," he's telling the Jews, "don't think you can say this to yourself, we have Abraham to our father." Because that's what they say. They say, we're Abraham's children. We're safe with God. He says, don't think you can say that we have Abraham for our father. For I say unto you that God is able of these stones to raise up children unto Abraham. In other words, God doesn't need you. Don't think because you're Abraham's children, that's going to give you a special position. He says, and now also the axe is laid unto the root of the trees. Therefore every tree which bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Remember that in Matthew, we're under the law. Right? And so he's telling you exactly what the result is if you're under the law. You don't produce good fruit, you're hewn down and cast into the fire. So, God doesn't need the Jews. Then let's go to Romans chapter 2. Verses 28 and 29. Romans chapter 2, verses 28 and 29. And now he's using Paul to explain to us something about the Jews and God's attitude towards them. Verse 28, for he is not a Jew which is one outwardly. And this is answering, can they count on the fact that they're Jews, that they're Israelites, that they're God's people? He says he's not a Jew which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh. Because that's their other claim. They've been circumcised. That brings them into the commonwealth of Israel. That makes them God's people. He says, if you're a Jew outwardly, in other words, if you're a Jew by ethnicity or by the fact you're a national Jew, you're by nature, that's not going to get you anything. He says, neither if you've been circumcised in the flesh is that going to get you anything. He says, but he is a Jew. He says it's not a Jew that's just had that done to them. He says, but he is a Jew which is one inwardly. Remember, God reads the hearts. It's all about our hearts. It doesn't matter what we do on the outside. And circumcision is that of the heart in the spirit and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men but of God. And isn't that the truth? Because if your thoughts and your beliefs and everything is in your heart and not outward, then men aren't going to praise you. But God knows. And that's what he's saying. When it's in there, God knows. So this is a whole new concept, right? God knows what's inside. And the Jews have been busy for generations dealing with what's outside and concentrating totally on looking good on the outside. Then let's read, let's go back to verses 17 to 24. Still chapter 2. And he starts here. He says, behold, thou art called a Jew, and restest in the law, and maketh thy boast of God. So he says, you boast about your situation, and you know his will, and knowest his will, and approvest the things that are more excellent, being instructed out of the law. See, they're the ones that knew. Like we know today, they're the ones that knew then, and he's telling them they knew. And they are confident that thou thyself art a guide of the blind, a light of them that are in darkness. He says, you who know all these things, you're confident that you're the leaders of those that don't know. An instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes. And then he says, which has the form of knowledge and of the truth in the law. And so the minute you see that, you start remembering what we've heard before is the form doesn't count. The substance counts. And he says, you have a form of it, you look like it. Thou therefore, which teachest another, teachest thou not thyself? Thou that preachest a man should not steal, dost thou steal? Thou that sayest a man should not commit adultery, dost thou commit adultery? Thou that abhorrest idols, dost thou commit sacrilege? Thou that makest thy boast of the law, through breaking the law dishonorest thou God? For the name of God is blasphemed among Gentiles through you, as it is written. So, what is he telling them? You don't have any position. Any position you have, you've ruined. You know, everything you've done, you've blasphemed the name of God in doing it. Now, in those days, God's people were the Jews. The Gentiles were the idol worshippers, the pagans. And he says, but those pagans, they blasphemed God because of your behavior. And when I look at that, I think, well, what about the name of Christ today? Today, we're Christians. And today, well, they say this nation's 90% Christian, which surely is not true. But nevertheless, the outside community looks at Christians and they say, y'all argue with each other, you all disagree on everything. How can we ever believe? I mean, y'all use the same book, but they're not following the book. They're following their religious denomination, and they're using the book for the things that they want to prove that denomination. Their guide is denominational rules or traditions, not the Word of God. If all of our guides were the Word of God and we were all open to the Word of God, then we not only would all know a lot more about the truth, but the things we were wrong in, somebody could correct us, because we'd be open to anybody that could come along out of the Word of God if that's what we depend on, if that's what we rely on, and correct us and help us and grow. And then we could truly say that somebody that is all confused just doesn't know the Word of God well enough. But today they're not confused because they don't know the Word of God well enough. Well, that's part of it. They don't. But it's because they've been following a denomination that takes certain things out of this Word. I remember some denominations when I first started looking around at them that hardly ever used the Word of God at all. And then I remember getting to a denomination and I thought, man, they really know the Bible because they used quite a few verses. But as I learned more and more, I realized they were the same. They learned enough verses to be like that covered wagon circle that's about to be attacked. And they defend themselves with these few verses that they've learned. But they're not out there learning more and exciting and wanting to know more and more about the Word of God. So that's the problem with it. The name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you, as it is written. Today the name of Christ is blasphemed because of many people that call themselves Christians, some that are, and don't study enough to grow and be a better example. For the Jews, the problem with what Paul was preaching is that they would have to give up their superior position and step down to the level of the Gentiles. That's the problem. It's the same, it was kind of like when England owned America as a colony. And America wanted freedom. For America it was easy. We wanted freedom. We would gain everything. Now we'd be on our own. We wouldn't have as much support from England and stuff, but we'd be free. But for England, they were going to lose. And they were going to lose big. And it's the same thing at that time for the Jews. For them to believe this, what they believed is everything that made them better no longer exists. And they're in the same pot with the rest of us. And that's what made it so hard. Romans chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. This would just, a Jew, it would just destroy him. What then? Are we better than they? Asks Paul. In other words, are we Jews better than those Gentiles? And he says, in no wise, for we have before proved both Jews and Gentiles that they are all under sin. That's blasphemous to a Jew.